Good afternoon, everyone. This is Guardians of the Past and Present, Conservation in Action. I'm Peter Trippi, and I'm delighted to be moderating this conversation today. I'm delighted to say that those in the room have on their chair a full set of biographies for the panelists. So I'm going to give very abbreviated summaries for the video audience and then move on to the juicy conversation. At the far end of the dais here is Lauren Fly. She's a paintings conservator and collections manager based in New York. Through the Fly Arts Initiative she founded in 2011, she works with museums, private collectors, galleries, and other stewards of cultural heritage to preserve their objects. Lauren is Chair Emerita of the Conservators in Private Practice Specialty Group of the American Institute for Conservation and works with the National Heritage Responders, Materials Working Group, and Art in Transit 2.0. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you.
And next to her, Alexandra Kirtley is the Montgomery Garvin Curator of American Decorative Arts at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where she has been a curator since 2001. She is currently co-curating the museum's new American art galleries, covering the period 1840 to 1960, and the accompanying exhibition, A Nation of Artists, opening on April 12. Alexandra also worked closely with the Winter Show team on the marvelous installation on view, now here in the main lobby, the American Chair, 250 Years of Form. Congratulations and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Before we continue, much gratitude to Helen Allen and the other organizers of the Winter Show for inviting us to be here. That invitation emerged from the friendship between the Winter Show and the American Institute for Conservation, which is the leading membership association for current and aspiring conservators and allied professionals. Along with its foundation, AIC supports and empowers professionals, institutions, and the public in preserving and protecting our irreplaceable cultural heritage. Today, AIC and FAIC are represented in the room by their executive director, Lissa Rosenthal-Yaffe, who is based in Washington but visits New York often, right here. Also with us is Danielle Amato Milligan, who became president of FAIC in 2023 and is based in Brooklyn. There's Danielle. I was honored to serve as president before Danielle, which is one reason why I'm sitting here today. This is an ideal moment to consider the ever-changing field of conservation. As we celebrate America's 250th anniversary throughout the year ahead, we all will hear ever more stories about this country's extraordinary artworks and artifacts. In the background of every one of those stories is sound stewardship. Somehow, those historic items got from wherever they were made to wherever they are today. We should always tip our hats to the many people who helped make that happen, people who saw it as their civic responsibility to ensure the objects were handed down to the next generation intact. That important work goes on, but unfortunately, most objects don't come with instruction manuals. Most private owners know to call a conservator when an emergency occurs, but they may not know about preventive conservation or how to spot deterioration. As today's program will demonstrate, the Winter Show team is very focused on how conservation intersects with the artworks we all love. I want to point you to a fascinating article inside the Winter Show catalog titled The Conservation Conversation, and also to an article titled The Conservation Problem inside the latest issue of the magazine Antiques. Both of those publications are on your chair hanging in a tote bag. So please be sure to take those home and read them because they're fascinating. Both of those articles feature commentary from our panelist, Alexandra Kirtley. So we're going to hear more. We're going to dig deeper together on some of these topics. Let's begin. One key theme that kept emerging during our planning meetings for today is the significance of collaboration among conservators, scientists, curators, and other allied professionals. Could each of you please give us an example of such partnerships in your own experience?
Thank you all for coming. It's great to be here with you all. And no one works in isolation in any field that they do, and that's true whether you're in conservation in museums or in private practice. That's an essential part of my work. It's actually one of the things I enjoy the most is speaking with allied professionals and other conservators from a variety of places. And one thing I'm heavily involved with that I got involved with just selfishly because it was information I wanted and needed is the Materials Working Group, which is a group of conservation scientists, exhibit designers, registrars, conservators, curators, everyone from a range of different jobs within not just the museum setting, but anyone who cares for cultural heritage objects. And the idea was, we need more cross communication. And so information doesn't become siloed. The conservation scientists are doing great work that gets published in some conservation science journals, but I'm not a conservation scientist. I took a lot of organic chemistry, but, translating that and helping, get that mapped onto the everyday work that we all do is something we all need help with. And so we get together. I think we started in 2018. And the idea is to build a resource that has information on not just conservation materials, but things like the paint that they use in the galleries and what goes into the case. We have case makers who are involved. And so this was our last in-person meeting, which was 2024 at MoMA. You can see it's a pretty good sized crew. We actually have to cap attendance just because of space constraints. And so we meet virtually. I was actually at a meeting on Thursday downtown at Bopes where we were just working on some things together. And then in a similar vein is the Art in Transit 2.0 group, which Art in Transit, for those of you who don't know, is like one of the seminal packing manuals. It was written in the early 90s out in the National Gallery. It focused on paintings in the early 90s, as some of us remember, like kind of a long time ago now, and it is in desperate need of updating. And so we're working with packers. So it's people from Packin, people from ISAFAT, people from ARCS, the registrars, who are, lots of people are working on these issues in very different places. So to kind of bring that together, and that's an international group. We're having a symposium. We had our first symposium at the AIC meeting in Salt Lake City 2 years ago. We presented this was a roundtable discussion we had at ARCS in St. Louis this past November. There's going to be another symposium in Oslo later this year. ARCS is the Association of Registrars and Collection Specialists. Packin, preparators, and it's the Packin, I never remember. It's PACCIN. They're like the packing and art handling. And then ISAFAT, also, the whole thing gets away from me, but it's the International Art Shipping guiding body.
Alexandra, any thoughts on collaboration in particular?
Well, I would just say that from a curatorial standpoint, I feel very much like I am representing a huge team behind me from the museum, but the people I work the most closely with are conservators. And conservators really are, their focus is the materials, so the artist's materials, the preservation of them, sometimes returning them back if they've deteriorated because of some unnatural aging process that may have happened to it. But really we try to preserve the artist's legacy through the artist's materials. And I think that's an important distinction. But we work hand in glove. And oftentimes their treatment, if they're surveying, analyzing, treating, is completely informed by my historical analysis and also placing it in context. So where did this come from? And what are the other works like it? Because oftentimes a work of art is part of a progression, an artist's progression, or part of a type of work of art that is important to understand where that lies, where the work of art lies. So I collaborate with a whole slew of people at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, but none more closely than the conservators. So it's really a partnership.
There's a lot of unexpected partnerships that happen in conservation and private practice as well, or not unexpected, actually, they should be more expected. So there's things that, people we're in contact with, like the insurers, like Chubb is one of my favorite people to work with, and they're a major sponsor of the Winter Show, but there's things like the museum groups we all belong to, but within a private context. So there's the Responsible Art Market Initiative, and that's art lawyers, appraisers, and they're doing the same risk mitigation and discussion of like some of these issues that come up more in private practice, but provenance researchers from museums also are there. For a sometimes very niche field, it actually has a very wide net of connection.
And I think we also have learned of late, since I've been around for 25 years in the museum field, to share out, right? So it's not about hoarding information. It's really about sharing out. And oftentimes the provenance of a work of art can help us understand what may have happened when it changes hands from generation to generation. That is extremely helpful. And if you're working with a set of furniture, which you'll see later, when it gets divided up, you can see differences. So the provenance is really important. And I do provenance research, obviously. So.
There's a subtle tension between preserving something versus sharing it with museum visitors or living with it at home. Could you describe a situation where that paradox came into sharp focus?
Yes. So as this slide amply demonstrates, this was just down the street over at 5th near the bottom of the park. We do a lot of the same work that we did. I mean, I worked in museums for the first half of my career. The activities are the same. The context and the infrastructure can be quite different. And so it's the subtle decision making of, do we wish there was, this building had a freight elevator or a loading dock and I didn't have to I had to walk into 5th and hold the cabs. Sure. But, we all have a job to do and you kind of get it done. And I see my job as a conservator, the private collectors love their art and they want to live with it as well. They should, you could keep art perfectly safe by having it wrapped and in storage forever. Actually, that can lead to some damage, but another story. But that's not, that's not the point. My job is to, and it's the part I love the most. It's another kind of collaboration is helping them understand the different impacts of well, we could hang this beard in watercolor in this room. It has quite a lot of light. But, understanding that. And at the end of the day, as long as they know the risks and they're enjoying it, and, we'll mitigate that. We'll slip cover it when they're not in residence. We'll put the UV filter on. Maybe it can hang on a different wall. It's that sort of creative decision making. It's not a compromise. It's just critical thinking.
Having a conversation.
And it's a conversation. It's a discussion so that they understand and everyone knows where everyone's coming from, and that's all fine.
And I would say in the museum world, it's somewhat not a conversation. Because our job is to protect a work of art and every work of art, right? From the most nominal to the largest, Cezanne bathers or whatever it may be, and in perpetuity. And so oftentimes that in perpetuity requires us to be really conservative, where's that word, about how often we show it. Of course, works on paper and textiles being the most, right? But also how close the public can get to it and whether that's vulnerable, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that it becomes a little more, I always should say this too. I'm a believer that art should be out and should be seen. There's that question of if a tree falls in the woods, does it really, and no one hears it, does it really make a noise? Well, if a work of art is in storage and no one sees it, is it really a work of art? It's meant to be.
That's not why the artist created it.
It's meant to be seen. It's meant to be seen. So anyway, there is that tension. When we work with our collectors, if a work of art is a promised gift to us, we do have a little bit more sway, but we try to be extremely sensitive. And generally, these are people who understand the vulnerabilities, correct? But if a collector wants to, live with something, I would say that most collectors, there are very few collectors who I know or ever encountered who are not concerned about the preservation. Everybody.
They do, and they want to know, and a lot of it is information that gets presented differently. Everyone got the message about don't hang it in direct sunlight, but it's actual total light level in the room generally, and it's cumulative, and it's a subtlety that a lot of it is just kind of client education is what other professions call it, talking through things.
They find it really interesting that we have this little machine that you go pow onto the textile, and it's you can call it a fadometer or a fadometer, however you might think of it. That fadometer, okay. So about how much the dyes on the textile are fading, and so we use that. People are fascinated by it. So I would also say that in the past decades, the conservator has become much more visible to the collector.
Yes, and that's also like that's just as we become more established as a field and that information has gotten out there, that it is more people know to be kind of paying attention to this a little more and being able to show them like if you lift the mat on a photograph and you're like, see, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, that's, you know, that's part of it.
Previously, we chatted a bit about the delicate balance between paralyzing fear and creative inspiration. For example, are we certain the object looked like this originally, or can we present one way it might have looked?
Right. I was going to start with a high test that was that came to the Philadelphia Museum of Art's collection, actually without its legs. Its legs had been taken off, and so those were glued back on. But when I became the curator and started studying this work of art, worked with my conservators to really study it, and it's an oddball. It's from Philadelphia. I'm like, really? It's really strange. And furniture is something that you can sort of expect. There's a little bit more expectation about what something may look like because there's a really nice progression, and a lot of, chairs aren't made in sets of 1. Usually they're made in sets of 10. And so anyway, and this one was signed. It's signed multiple times, J.O.S. Claypool, 1743. So I examined it very, very closely with my conservators and started really, really studying it. So Josiah Claypool, maybe, or Joseph Claypool, his father. And it was said that the father had died in 1744. Well, I started doing my little curatorial work, and it ends up that the father died in 1741, and his will was probated in 1744. His son, Josiah Claypool, who received all of his father's cabinet-making tools in 1738, was caught stealing silver from Nathaniel Richardson, was brought in front of a court in the city of Philadelphia, and was exiled from the city of Philadelphia and made his way to Charleston, South Carolina by March 1739, where he advertised his joinery shop. And he lived in Charleston and made furniture there from 1739 to 1757 when he died. So his father's dead in 1743. It has to be Josiah Claypool. And so therefore, this is Charleston, South Carolina. So that's one sort of work that we do to also make sure that, by the way, the signatures are authentic. So there are multiple ones of them, and the conservation scientists can examine them. So they help to support and guide my research. This is another exciting project I worked on in 2012. This is one of the museum's anchor paintings of our 18th century galleries. This is Elizabeth Lloyd Cadwallader, her husband John, and her daughter Anne sitting on top of a table. And it's a fabulous painting, Charles Wilson Peale, 1772. It's one of 5. So his father and mother are also painted, and his brother and sister are also painted. They were painted last so that the baby Anne could be included. The frames, 3 of them were carved by James Reynolds. 2 of them were carved by a carver named Hercules Courtenay. These are English emigres who came in. In 1909, a very well-intended descendant who owned the paintings cut off the C scrolls and S scrolls. They're made of white pine. They were extremely brittle. They were in the basement of the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. And the curlicues that went sort of outside of that plane were cut off. So it hangs in a period room on paneling, so you couldn't see much of it. Well, it was called to loan in Korea. And it was going to be hanging on a gallery wall next to fabulous Copley paintings with their original frames. And I went storming into the director's office, Timothy Rubb, and I said, Timothy, this cannot go to Korea. Looking in this frame, it will just sink. It will just die. It's Charles Wilson Peale himself, the artist who said that a mediocre painting will survive if it has a good frame. So he said to me, okay, he always called me by my last name, and he said, okay, Kirtley, if you can raise the money and you can have a travel frame, because that's what I recommended, that we carve a travel frame, right? They're very common to have a travel frame. If you can carve a travel frame and it can be on a plane headed for Seoul, South Korea on January 3rd, this is about May 2012, it can go. You can do it. So I did. Well, I shouldn't say I. This is Brett Headley. He's a conservator who grew up in Williamsburg with his father, Mac Headley, who was a cabinet maker. And he is a card-carrying conservator, graduate of the Winter Tour program. And he also majored in drawing. So he and I went about, we studied our frame, we x-rayed it, we took samples, we did everything you possibly could. We traveled to the Met and to Yale and to all looking at frames. And he came up with a drawing for the frame and he began carving. We used white pine, just like the original. This poor man, you can see all the coffee cups. He was the only person in the building, the Philadelphia Museum of Art's building, during Hurricane Sandy.
Wow.
Right. So what you do when you do this is you carve, and then you cover it with gesso, and then you carve the details into the gesso, and then you gild it, and then you patinate it. Well, there we have it. So that is before and after, and you can see that what a difference the carve frame makes. And we patinated it to John Cadwallader's the trim on his waistcoat there, that gilding, and it just made all the difference in the world. So it has remained in the travel frame. Now the good news is more than half of the original frame survives, so about 60%, and all the original gilding is underneath all of the original frames. So at some point when we have the funding and the people, we will add the bits onto the edge. Right, we will not make 4 new travel frames. We will add the bits onto all 5 of the original frames. So the other project I worked on was a set of painted furniture that was conserved, and this is Peggy Ollie, and we used this to generate funding. This was like her Hollywood glamour shot. So Peggy Ollie started as an assistant conservator after the project ended, 6 years of work. She was associate conservator, and she's now the senior conservator of furniture and woodwork at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So this is Peggy in her glamour shot. But this is what she really looked like when she was doing her work. So every layer of oil that was on top of these painted and gilded surfaces, Philadelphia furniture, 1808, painted by a canvas painter, actually a theatrical set designer named George Bridport. Every layer of oil that had been placed on top of it, about 12 layers, had a different sort of antidote. So it required a different,
Oil is one of the hardest things to remove. I really feel for her. And those are like heavy solvents.
Yeah,
she's working with.
Very heavy solvents. So this is what the corner of the knee looks like. You can see it in process. And of course, conservators always show it during, under UV light. So there it is. And there's the finished product on the right. And this is her work on this and my work were just going hand in glove the whole time. And I was able to figure out who made the furniture. I was able to really strongly document who painted it. We sort of had some idea, but you can see those little holes, those little pounce marks. This is all hand painted, and it's actually gilding that has a pigment added to it. Here we are working on the upholstery because the upholstery was very much a part of it, and we had a lot of evidence of the upholstery. For the exhibition, Timothy Rubb loved this project so much. He said, "Why don't you do an exhibition and a book?" So we did. Classical splendor. But here on the right, you can see these 2 chairs, and one of them has yellow and a certain upholstery on it, and one of them has the sort of an open fringe on the bottom and a red cushion. So for a curator and a conservator, it's really difficult to be like, I'm 100% certain that it was yellow cushion. So you're always sort of like, we're like 99% sure. But in that case, that 1% case that we're not correct, that it's yellow, we showed it with the red just to make sure. And also, what we also find is that the visitor doesn't really like that the voice of God from, the museum says, right? They want to know how. And so that's what we also do with this exhibition. Peggy and I co-curated it. And so we had iPads that showed the process. And we think it's yellow. And if you're interested to know why, here's how we figured it out. And here's what we think. It could be red. We're not 100% sure. So it was really important. And people liked that because it made them feel a part of the process.
Well, it's also interesting. People understand ambiguity and uncertainty. It exists like everywhere in life, and it is impossible to know exactly what it looked like. And it's great with something like Deck Arts where you can have one upholstered and one not. And it is the context that people find interesting. And so I'm a paintings conservator. For paintings, we can't always do that, but you can't show both, but we can show reconstructions and educated guesses. And that's a whole part of why it looks that way. Also, where it's somewhat different with paintings is like you're never One, it will never look like it did the day the artist painted it because that was 200 years ago. Like that's not realistic, and it's also not the point, really. These things have age. Even modern and contemporary things will
That's right.
change quite quickly.
And the artist
that's
knows
fine.
that.
Yes,
Yes, the artist knows their materials. And
especially from this period, people
exactly.
very careful about what they chose
We had a
and why.
whole installation on the materials. And interestingly, because Peggy, there were about 12 layers of oil and we kept 3 on, because if you get too close down to that oil, you don't want to do what's called undercut and have all of the decorations suddenly
And then the
appear.
whole thing just lists.
So underneath the yellow silk there, we have a layer of red silk just to bring the color of the yellow silk down, because you don't want it to be like brand new yellow silk. Again, 1808, designed by Henry Latrobe, Philadelphia, painted by George Bridport, upholstered by John Ray. We know so much about it, but it was preserved because it's gold and paint. And so successive generations had just layered on oil. A lot of painted furniture is not like that. And just recently, a sofa sold at Christie's this past week, and that one has lost a lot of its decoration. And the idea is that the person, the foundation that acquired it, is going to build a replica so that they don't have to touch it, because there's so much not known to conjecture on these. This was what was there was not conjecture. It was just underneath these like cataracts of color, so that it was really shielded. So
Well, this transparency is appreciated by the public. I can say that as a museum goer. I'm grateful for that candor.
right.
And it's interesting to imagine that over on the side of private owners and how they see this. That leads me to a next question, which is both of you are in touch with private owners a lot. Can you cite some best practices that they should pursue, or ones that you admire that they are pursuing? Let's start with Lauren.
Yes, a large part of my contact is with private owners. And again, that's one of the things I like the most. There's a lot of great conservators in museums, but most art actually isn't in museums. So it's nice to be able to interact with them as well. I would say the sort of number one thing, and this, I was delighted when you asked us this on the panel, because this is one of my personal drums I love to beat, is, yes, we repair artworks once they have been damaged, but conservators actually do a lot more than that. And you should, my biggest piece of advice is to involve a conservator in the conversation much earlier. So even before acquisition, like I think most people know, to maybe get your own condition report on something before you acquire it. Like, don't necessarily trust carte blanche, the one that you're given. And then also talking with the conservator, I help a lot of my clients. I do collections management, so I oversee the shipping, double check the crating and the packing materials, even things like talking through, like, okay, so you want to buy this, where do you intend to hang it? And do you understand actually long term the care that this is going to need? Like this thing, for instance, we will, if you don't want to frame it, that's fine, but then we will have to clean it once a year. And they would be like, oh, okay, actually, I hadn't thought about that. And so it's like part of that discussion. And that involves things that now as a field we know as preventive conservation. So for instance, this is framing. I think the back of this frame probably looks familiar to a lot of people in the room. And it's okay, but it's not great for reasons that might not be obvious. So the first is that the paintings is deeper than the frame. And so that means the back of the painting is in direct contact with the wall. So it makes a tidy little microclimate of humidity and dirt for things to grow, like mold, and for there to be sort of moisture getting into the system, making it damage. And then you can also see the metal clips. Again, it's not like the worst. It's better than a nail through the stretcher into the frame, but it's also not great because it doesn't have enough bend to allow the stretcher to flex subtly as relative humidity changes. And also it's so sharp on the edge that it's cutting right into the edge of that delicate canvas edge. So it's going to start to wear, and then it will start to fail. And then that leads to a whole host of other problems. So basic things like conservation framing and backboarding can do a lot of good. So this is a large format Pat Steer, and a lot of large format modern and contemporary works have extremely slack canvas tension, which doesn't look necessarily very alarming to people who aren't conservators. But then Every time the canvas moves like that, it undermines the stability of the ground layer or the paint layer, and it causes, it'll make contact with the stretcher, and it will cause cracks over time and then loose paint. And so it's this cumulative effect. And one way to mitigate that is to do what we call a cami lining, which you probably can't even see very well. It's very subtle. So essentially what you do is take a second piece of canvas, and this is a very casual word for a much more delicate procedure, but shove it under the stretcher and then stretch it under tension and secure it to the back of the stretcher. So it's not adhered to the original canvas. It's just staples, additional staples, and that creates an extra layer of support for the canvas and really takes down the amount of vibration in that slack tension and also helps bring rigidity to the stretcher overall. If you don't want to do that, you can put a padded backboard on. So this is a large Rashid Johnson, and backboards are good for any number of other things as well. And you can make one that's padded. And again, it doesn't touch the back of the canvas, but it takes up some of that extra space and creates a little air cushion that dampens the vibration. This is incredibly straightforward and easy to do for a conservator. And it is much less annoying and to be a little gauche, much less expensive than treating damage once it happens. And a backboard will prevent a range of different kinds of damage. So it's the little things like that for a private collector, I really try and drive home. And also just good collections management from people who know what they're doing.
Having a plan.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wise. Alexandra, your thoughts on private collectors? You mentioned working with folks who have promised gifts, for example, but you also talk to lots of people who are not related to the museum yet.
Well, and I would also say that there's a lot of misunderstanding about temperature and relative humidity.
Yes.
Right. And so when you walk into a museum, you feel this temperature and it's always at a stable temperature. That is not necessarily something that you have to have in your house at all. And so actually in recent years, they broadened the relative humidity and temperature sways. What people need to understand is that you can't have fast ones, spikes. Yeah, you can't have spikes. That's the scary ones. But essentially, I think that people's houses or where something was made, was made for this house. Maybe it's in the South and it's really hot and didn't have air conditioning before. I think exactly, you are correct. But you have to be careful understanding, because sometimes the types of climates that we introduce to something, I mean, even when it enters the museum from another type of climate, we have to take into account acclimatization.
So yeah, so you leave a crate packed for 24 hours in a new climate so it can kind of stabilize itself. Because again, it's this tight protocol of 70 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit and 45 to 55 degrees relative humidity that we as a field are revisiting because for a variety of reasons, sustainability, it's not tenable. And we're finding it's not strictly necessary all the time. And it is the wild swings of more than 10% in either temperature and or relative humidity that will cause the damage. And actually my first degree was historic preservation and architectural conservation. And a lot of times, it was sort of in the 80s and 90s and everyone was like, oh, we got to get the environment under control. And so they would retrofit the buildings and get these really tight HVAC systems in. And it actually ended up causing damage because the building
starts sweating.
Materials have a memory. This is not to say it doesn't matter, you don't need to do anything, but it's a more subtle decision-making process than that. There's other things that I am frequently more worried about.
And as far as costs go, I mean, museums do worry about cost. Hello. And so the systems can handle the broader swaths of the parameters and for less without having the spikes. And so
I work with a lot of corporate collections, and they moved into this beautiful new building, and they turn off the HVAC rather dramatically over the weekend because no one's there. And so they were finding problems in the canvas paintings. They're like, why are all these, there's these little dents at the corners. And I was like, well, that's because of this. And they're like, oh, we can't cool it all the time. I was like, you don't have to cool it all the time. We'll work with the building engineers. It's a more involved discussion.
But with objects, ceramics and glass and ivory actually can be really sensitive.
Specifically, yeah.
I would like to ask both of you about future generations and emerging generations of colleagues. I'll start with Lauren. You graduated from the Conservation Center at NYU, and you've given lectures there since. You've said that preventive conservation and emergency preparedness were not highlighted much when you were a student. Apparently, that has changed. How so and why? And what other concerns do the students have these days?
Sure. So, yeah, I have a lot of contact with graduate students, not just from NYU, because obviously they're close, but from some of the other programs. I worked in England for a long time as well. Yes, preventive conservation it is now a sort of separate subset within conservation. And it wasn't, we were taught that same kind of information about relative humidity and into like pest management and all of that. But it is a really specific field of study now that people can be a preventive conservator. And so they're really interested in that because, we all love art and a lot of us became conservators because it's very rewarding to repair the damage on the art. But I think if you ask any of us, we would say we'd much rather it not get damaged in the first place. Accidents are still going to happen. There will always be a need, but if we can keep things in better shape for longer, that's more to the benefit of everyone. And so the students are a lot, Delaware and NYU and the other programs all have preventive conservation classes now. And the same with emergency disaster and response. That was sort of ad hoc training you kind of got by default by showing up when there was one. And they are now actually within the preventive conservation class at NYU. I went and talked about a fire I worked on, and they are specifically interested in that because with climate change and other things we're all aware of, those natural disasters are becoming much more frequent and much more severe. And they are very cognizant of the fact that that's something. I have a picture actually. This is a recently emerged conservator who came on site to the fire in Red Hook. And they're all aware that these are things they're going to have to be dealing with a lot more. And so there's been a lot more publications recently on focusing on how to organize, how to do all of that work. There's also a really impressive and notable interest in grad students who want to go straight into private practice. So when I was training, it was sort of, there were of course conservators in private practice, but you generally assumed you would go straight into a museum. And that's because just as the field developed, really, starting as a professional field with academic training in the early 70s, the goal was to get people to think of conservation as a specific discipline that had a scientific background and deep art historical study, and to establish those positions within museums because it was important. So we've done that, but there's also still very much a need in private practice. And a lot of the younger students like the kinds of opportunities and just different things you come across in private practice. This is actually one of my interns, Avery, who now I'm delighted to say just is in the middle of her first year of paintings conservation at the Courtauld. Her mother is a collections manager for Greek and Roman at the Met. So she knew about conservation very early, specifically within a museum context, and still knows that she kind of probably wants to go into private practice. So AIC, when I was with conservators in private practice, we run programming connecting emerging conservators with people in private practice for mentorships, for internships, and things like that.
That's so important.
And Brett Headley, who did the frame, he's in private practice now. So he trained through the museum, and then
and it used to be you kind of if you were in a museum and then you left and went private, you didn't go back. But now there is more back and forth,
agreed,
and as it probably should be, because it's obviously very related work, but there's lots of different kinds of skills.
They're seeing more, and they'll often come to the museum and ask their colleagues at the museum for it, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of collaboration between.
Maybe you could expand on that for us, that you deal with lots of emerging scholars and curators, and they seem to be more conservation-minded or aware than they used to be.
They do. I think they are. They're aware that it is a part of the curatorial process is to include, to work with the conservator and get understand the materials, understand what's going on, as we typically say, what's going on with this, with the work of art, and getting those extra eyes in there, everybody. So we do work with
Well, your work has certainly borne that out when we see these displays that you create where conservation is addressed directly.
Conservation is definitely addressed, and we oftentimes put it on the label.
Yeah.
So yes,
And there's a lot of great, I've given lectures down at NYU, but in the art, like museum studies program, in the art history classes at the IFA, the art history students have to take a couple of conservation classes. I did some at Pratt, and that's just a fine arts college, knowing that we want people to talk to conservators earlier and about more different kinds of things. And also we want to talk to them. So it's just understanding where each other is coming from and what we can offer each other in conversation.
And I would say too, though, that sometimes when there are the interns or even they're doing their third year or so at the museum, our conservation department is excellent about getting those people to speak with me and get my input on what they're doing. So it's not just that they are looking at the work of art themselves, but they're hearing from me where it came from and who owned it, and getting a context so that they learn to collaborate with us.
Yeah,
as well.
they're not just talking to other conservators in the studio.
Exactly.
All of us who collect want to know where to turn for expert guidance. Can each of you share with us your favorite resources? Give us some tips on where to look.
Sure. So if you're looking for a conservator, the first and easiest place to look is AIC, the American Institute for Conservation, has a find a professional tool on the website. You can put in your location and the kinds of specialty that you need. So wooden artifacts, facts, or photography, paintings. You can also look by services. So if you need disaster response or you need a courier, something like that, you can start there. Ask around, like everyone at the fair, like dealers know people, gallerists know people, your insurance broker will undoubtedly know great conservators. Appraisers, we work with a lot of appraisers. So just start asking around. If AIC doesn't give you, but like usually even through AIC, if I can't help that person, I know other people who do, and I will send them along.
Yeah.
And just check that they're, what their experience is, where they trained, that sort of thing, because there are a lot of sort of fly by night old restores, but
That's true. The restore.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say too that the dealers, we know all the dealers. They are survivors, and they know us. And just as just because as conservators and curators become more collaborators through the years, dealers in the commercial world also has. It used to be sort of this like dividing, like you're over there, I'm over here, and this is the Berlin Wall right here. So, but it's not that way anymore. So the dealers know a lot of us, but our websites also have emails, and we're always happy to answer
Always.
anything.
Like,
we're always
ask. Yeah.
that's actually the fun.
That's the most fun part.
Inquiries are so much, it's like amartinfo at Phila Museum, right? We love those inquiries.
That's great. Thank you for that. I should also point out that, believe it or not, AIC, its annual meeting, which is held every spring, is open to the public. That there are lots of technical workshops that might not make any sense, but there are lots of programs that are on offer for those of us who are lay people who would like to know more about conservation and such. The next edition of that is in Montreal, which is such a wonderful place to be in the spring, 28 April through the 2nd of May, sponsored by Bank of America, which we love because they not only support AIC, but also the most important conservation treatment grant program on Earth.
Yeah, they actually did the treatment for the Augustus St. Gaudens Diana, the weather vane that was on top of Madison Square Gardens, that's at the Philadelphia Museum. They did that. And I also just came back from Europe.
Yeah.
And throughout Italy and London, there are a lot of Bank of America conservation projects. So
it's laudable.
Yes,
So
it is.
notable, and
It
we
is.
shout out to them. So what I'm going to do is ask the audience if you've got any questions to pose, and then we'll carry on.
I have seen quite a bit of framed paintings that are now using the sides as part of the artwork. It's one thing when you're dealing with a print where you can float it, but how would you recommend something like that framed?
Frame, sure. So you can do like a shadow box style frame on a painting like that, so you can still see the edges. If it's like a Dingdom McCarran and there's a lot of things on the side, you can put it in a plexiglass box. Obviously, at some point, dimensions make that not realistic. But there's a lot of really great framers too. So I would say talk with your framer and ask them what they're, like explain your concerns. They have a lot of experience I mean, this is what they do, and they can also make suggestions and then maybe in conversation with a conservator. But I would say just do a shadow box frame with more of a border so you can see the side of the work a little bit. A lot of integrated artists' original frames, if they're delicate, we will still frame it as a whole piece, but with more of a border so you can see that artist's original frame, but it's not being handled. It's a little sturdier on the wall. It's not carrying the weight of the painting, etc.
I also have a question about framing. Is there a type of wood you would recommend? Because I'm concerned as things age, people buy things and they have them for the duration of the rest of their life. Is there a wood that is more appropriate than others? Like, is there a way to seal the frame properly and maybe use a less
Yeah.
reactive gas than just air within it that might be appropriate for some things?
It depends on your goal. So actually, my former director, Timothy Rowe, was really curious as to why we chose to use the white pine, which is the original material. He's like, well, if it's brittle and it broke, why are we using the white pine? And it's a curatorial decision, but it's also we want to carve in the type of wood that had been intended for the work of art originally. So there's that choice. But as far as the materials go, I mean, I think the off-gassing that'll go everything sort of off-gasses a little bit, and
Everything off gases a little bit. But the best thing to do, which is what we usually do with conservation framing, is there's different kinds of materials. The most common one is called Marvel Seal. It's an impermeable barrier. You put it inside the rebate and it protects the off-gassing material, which it's off-gassing, but if it's off-gassing, then it's also probably acidic, and that direct contact is even more damaging than the off-gassing. If you put that barrier in, then you're okay. And if the frame is like off-gassing into the room, it's fine because it's like such a volume of air with air exchange. For instance, a panel painting, we build a microclimate box inside the frame, so it looks like it's just in a regular frame with glazing in front, but on the back, it's actually enclosed you make a Marble Seal envelope, and then you seal it and you put coroplast and all this stuff. So it's in its own little environment. You can put desiccants in it, so you also control the relative humidity. So there's lots of solutions like that. In terms of wood choice, as long as it's not like the cheapest wood from Lowe's, I think you're okay. Like poplar's usually good, like it's fine. Walnut, like all of this stuff, pine, whatever, it's fine. It's making sure the rebate is lined and that the framing envelope of the artwork inside is protected from that material. So yes, you can seal it. Some people do paint instead of Marble Seal. Marble Seal is just frankly easier.
But I would say that from a curatorial standpoint, I would spend a lot of time figuring out the best frame for the work of art, because a bad frame can really sink it and make it. And so walnut was used in the Victorian period, as well as those big gilded. I mean, the frame has different purposes and different periods. So if you think of like a salon hang from the late 19th century, where you have the paintings hung, from the wall, cheek to jowl, a lot of times the width of those was to isolate the canvas visually, right? Protect it to a certain extent, but really to isolate it so that you're looking at the canvas with its own sort of border. Right. And so framing is
super important for both of us. So from a curatorial and for conservation, like we've sort of talked about disaster preparedness, and that quote you said where a good frame will save a painting for hundreds of years, that's also literally physically true. A lot of times when I've shown up to there's a burst pipe or there's a fire or whatever, a good frame will absolutely save a piece of artwork. So it takes a lot of time to think through the aesthetic decisions. A good frame will cost you money, but what you will save on the back end, again, not just as an investment, a financial investment, but in terms of the artwork itself, it will be much more recoverable, much more treatable, and it will be damaged less if it has a good frame with a backboard glazing, if you can stomach it. I know that that's the biggest battle for paintings to face is glazing, and I get it, but it makes a tremendous difference.
So you mentioned the word desiccant. A desiccant is something that eats up bad materials. And so we use, like for our silver, we haven't talked about metals.
Oh, yeah.
Silver in all of our cases, it's like one of the most common questions. How do you keep your silver polished? We don't polish it, right? Polishing is naturally removing parts of it, right? So we do not polish it. We put a desiccant, a sulfur scavenger, in the bottom of the cases. The cases are sealed, and as sulfur enters, hopefully slowly, the desiccant eats up that
It
sulfur.
like absorbs it.
At a house, in a home, like in your house, how can you do that? First of all, I would say that sometimes just washing the silver will take off, right? So you can just wash it
Mhm.
and then dry it with a nice soft cloth. But the other really easy thing to do with if you have silver collections is to put a UV bulb in your air handling. So like in my house, we have a UV bulb in the air handling system. So the air comes in from outside, gets heated, and then as it comes through into the house, there's just a UV bulb that you can get, and it has a special filter. And it kills the sulfur as it enters your house. And they're about, I mean, you can get these filters for, I don't know, added to your house for $2,500, and it does the whole house.
What a great tip. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a question in the fourth row here. Yes.
Let's say there is a flood and the water touches the bottom of the painting. I know that if you just like use a dryer and then I heard that that's really bad.
Yeah.
What will be the like a first step that's good to prevent more damage before to bring the painting to the conservator? You wash it with water or
Okay.
dry them? Or?
Sure. So don't put a hairdryer on it. What you want to do is yes, get it dry, but with kind of natural air movement. So like a fan instead of a hairdryer, because you definitely don't want the heat around either. So get it out of a frame and put it, if you can get it flat on like some yoga blocks, just, on top of a table, and aim a fan at it and let it dry out. If it's like a burst water pipe, that's pretty clean water, so you're probably going to be okay. I wouldn't do anything else other than dry it before you take it to a conservator. If it's a flood water, that stuff is extremely nasty and very bad for you. So, and now comes everyone's least favorite conservator's answer, which is it depends, which is what we say kind of a lot. So it will depend on the kind of artwork, the size, like what's available on site. One, there's a lot of resources online, and the easiest, best one to go to is actually AIC has I actually have one in a bag over there. It's a disaster response wheel. It's like a little wheel, and you can like turn it. I will show it to you after if you want to come see it. You can turn it and say like, I have a ceramic, I have a painting, and it'll tell you like what to do. There's also an app version of it. If you have an iPhone, like a Mac OS, that information also lives online. There's a lot of great, especially like in LA with the fires. And as I said, like emergency and disaster response has always been around, but we're increasingly collaborating and establishing resources to share. And so if you go to the National Heritage Responders website on FAIC, on the AIC website, they also have a 24-hour hotline that you can call, and they will connect you with a conservator, and you can explain what's going on, and they'll get you connected to the right resources. So
I'll just chime in to say
yeah.
that website is very rich with leads when it comes to emergency preparedness. So please do check it out. If anybody wants to hold up their phone, there's the magic. That is where the info is from AIC and FAIC. Please also check the Philadelphia Museum of Art website for all sorts of good leads when it comes to the collections and all the exhibitions that you've been doing that have conservation in the mix. Thank you for your good questions. We appreciate that. I'm going to conclude by thanking our panelists for their extraordinary insights. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.